Good afternoon. Welcome to this Gaming in Germany webinar, in which we will take a closer look at some interesting recent developments in the regulated German iGaming market. In today's webinar, we will look at the latest regulatory developments, including the replacement of the current system for increasing monthly player limits and the upcoming evaluation of Germany's state gambling treaty. Second, we will be able to share some recent data on Germany's online gambling market, and based on these data, some recommendations on how to keep players engaged with legal offers. Of course, there's only so much we can do in one brief webinar. First slide, please. If you would like more information, please consider attending our upcoming Gaming in Germany conference on November 11 at the DoubleTree Hilton in Berlin. Next, please. This year's Gaming in Germany conference will focus on two topics in particular. First, the evaluation of the 2021 Glücksspielstaatsvertrag, State Gambling Treaty, and more specifically, what the industry can expect from this process. Second, how all stakeholders in Germany's regulated iGaming market can work together to turn around the ongoing growth of the black market. Both topics are highly relevant, and we encourage the entire industry to join us in Berlin to discuss these issues with the German regulator, trade parties, and leading operators. Next, please. Before we continue with today's webinar, I would like to thank our strategic partners and sponsors, which you can see listed on the screen. Thank you very much for being here, for supporting us. We totally appreciate it. As always, and next please, our webinars are interactive. If you would like to submit a question, to one of our speakers, you can do so through the Slido app. To use Slido, please scan the QR code on your screen or visit slido.com. Enter the event code GID, #GIG, and finally select the Q&A tab on the top of your screen. You can also look at other people's questions and upvote those questions. Questions will be addressed and, if possible, answered during the audience Q&A at the end of this webinar. With us today, we have two expert speakers. Dr. Joerg Hofmann, Senior Partner at Melchers Law Firm, as well as Josh Hodgson, Chief Operating Officer at H2 Gambling Capital. Welcome, Josh. Welcome, Joerg. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Willem.
Great. We're very glad to have you both here. As I said, the first speaker today is Dr. Joerg Hofmann, Senior Partner at Melchers Law Firm. Joerg, thank you very much for being here. I hope you're having a good day. Joerg, to start off, could you please provide us with a brief overview of the most important recent regulatory developments in the German iGaming market?
Sorry, I was mute. Yes, I hope you can hear me now. Thanks for your introduction, Willem. Good afternoon. And of course, I'm happy to provide some information on what is currently drawing our attention to. And there are some topics, some pending topics. And I'm sure there will be even more and more detailed when we all meet in Berlin. For the time being, let me start with this. I think there are two major points that are worth to mention, and we will elaborate on this later in our Q&A. I guess the first one is, how do we deal with the deposit limits? Deposit limits means we have a standard limit in Germany for every player every month, which is 1,000 euros. Based on approvals, the operators can provide extended limits up to 30,000. All these approvals, all these permissions will begin by the end of the year. And so we need renewals. And there's a big topic which we will raise later, the issues behind it. So, but the other thing which is important, of course, is the status of the current evaluation of the interstate treaty, which is on the run at the moment. We're expecting some results, and I will be happy to provide the current state as far as possible. It's not done already, but we have some information at hand. And then I would say from our daily business, we can see some interesting developments. To mention a minor one is the potential permissibility of betting on esports. We know in the interstate treaty, if you look at it currently, it's not part of the permitted bet types, but it's an interesting market. And since the German government just passed a draft of a law where they accept esports being part of the charitable commerce, it's the door opened for a new process of evaluating esports becoming sports in the sense of the interstate treaty. And this will be fueled up by the fact that the first Olympics, esports Olympics, will take place in Riyadh in 2027. Just to mention this, so I would say we can expect within the next probably maybe 1.5 years, it's likely that we have a change in regulation regarding this very interesting topic as well. We see in the practical review of daily business that GGL is not only looking at black market activities if something goes wrong, they're also looking how compliant license operators are. So every operator is well advised to make sure only offering legal and permitted games of chance and also, of course, betting types. We see hearings more and more initiated by GGL addressing license operators and complaining about the content. And usually we can realize it's not done voluntarily, it's probably by accident, by incident, but this could lead to serious results because it's all regarded as illegal gaming. That's just something that came up to my mind. Also, we see a rising demand for skill games and sweepstakes in Germany. We see a couple of operators from the United States and Canada and elsewhere targeting the German market and trying to find out whether these sort of offerings is possible. I think it is interesting because it shows that the over-regulated German market is creating and provocating new sorts of gaming offers. And for these operators, for these new companies, the key question is this a game of chance? Well, if that's the case, then there's no chance to offer it in a compliant manner in Germany, or is it not? And to find out where is the border, where are we crossing a border, and what could be done maybe in a compliant manner in order to be listed with app stores or to cooperate with payment service providers. I'm mentioning this because a year ago this was not a topic at all, and now we are receiving these sort of requests, I wouldn't say on a daily, but maybe on a monthly basis. That's one interesting point. And of course, one topic which is always very timely in Germany is how can we combat the black market, and including the question, how big is the black market? And I'm sure there's a big difference in the assessment of regulators and the industry in Germany. This is something where Josh will provide his insights into the market in Germany.
Thank you, Joerg. To your point of esports, we are happy to announce that we have a breakout session on the 11th of November by your colleague, Dr. Nepomuk Nothelfer, who will go deeper in this topic. This brings us to the second question of today, which deals with an issue that is rather urgent for Germany's licensed online operators. The current system for allowing player deposit limits increases will be phased out soon. Will there be a replacement system, Joerg? If so, what will this look like and how may this impact the market?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, these permissions, they will expire by the end of this year. And of course, it's important. They need a new approval, the operators. If not, these limits will be reduced down to the standard of 1,000 euros. So accordingly, we need to find out where are we at the moment. According to information provided by the German Sports Betting Association, the amount of 2.6 billion euros in bets per year results from players with a higher limit. So it's a third of the stakes being placed. It's a very important figure we need to consider. At the moment, the capability and credibility of and the creditworthiness of players is checked by a system that we all know by Schufa-G. Schufa-G. G stands for Glücksspiel, which is gaming, of course. And this system has been questioned by GGL, due to the results of some court jurisprudence. Will not elaborate on this, but it's a matter of fact. And the states, the lender in Germany, as well as the GGL, are now considering to introduce a new system. What they have in mind is a proceeding which they call Kontoblick. If you like to translate it, it would be account view or something. That means in this case, the account data of a player will be screened, and player would have to disclose all income from their bank account for the last 12 months. There are a couple of problems. Of course, data protection concerns arise at one hand, but also it is very likely that players will not accept to disclose these data and give such a far-reaching consent to access their account. Issue is, for the time being, we don't have a final solution in place, and this is what has been mentioned by the regulators. So, of course, the industry saw this as an alert issue, and the trade association, they sent a statement, a letter to the regulator saying where the problems lie and how likely it is we will lose a lot of players because they will turn to the black market because they wouldn't accept this kind of new system. And that Schufa G could still be an option which can be elaborated. So at the moment, my vision is that it's some kind of up in the air, which means that we cannot predict where we will be at the end of the year. Is there a new system in place? Is there a mandate for G, or will it be Kontoblick or something completely different? We cannot say where we are at the moment. Hopefully, when we are in Berlin, there is an update available. But for the providers, the operators, I think one advice is very, very important. They should at least, as soon as possible, submit a request to the regulator, to GGL, for an extension of the current permission or for a renewal or a new granting of such a permission up to 30,000 euros, which is the range that is currently under certain circumstances acceptable, in order to at least make sure a request has been filed and a decision has to be made by GGL. We hope that we can arrange with the regulator in due course to get this done before the end of the year, because if not, as I said before, then the standard limit applies, which is maximum of 1,000 euro per player per month. And this, of course, will lead to another loss of player traffic, because then all those who want to deposit more will find their way to black market operators where they don't have any limits at all.
Thank you, Joerg. Lots of developments, so let's keep following this. Final question for you, Joerg. So the 2021 State Gambling Treaty is currently being evaluated by the German states, with a final report being expected by the end of next year. What can you tell us about the evaluation process, and what kind of results can the industry expect?
There has been a lot of discussions about evaluation process. First of all, we need to mention that this is not simply looking at the market, reviewing and taking into account some figures. It's a very systematic review of the achievement of the objectives defined in Article 1 of the Interstate Treaty. The main achievement here is, apart from player protection, of course, is channeling the market. So it's a comprehensive and systematic approach on an empirically obtained data to find out whether these provisions of the Interstate Treaty serve to reach the goal or not, and if there is any need to amend the provisions, or even to change them completely if we found out it's not the right tool. We're not talking only about the goals, we're also talking about the measures, the instruments, the restrictions and regulations which are, let's say, guided by the provisions of the Interstate Treaty. And in this respect, the evaluation must be evidence-based. That's why many letters sent to GGL will be taken into consideration, but will not be part of the evaluation process because they're not always based on a scientific related evidence. That's important to understand. The Interstate Treaty foresees certain scenarios for the evaluation. We have seen the first interim report of the GGL, together with the lenders, which is published on January 31st 2024. So it's quite outdated, but it's a first review. The current one is pending. GDL contacted, among others, associations, trade associations, and so on, asking for statements, for reviews, and it's still pending. We don't have an expiry date for this proceeding, so we cannot say where we are at the moment and what the current result is. But what we can do is we can evaluate the current topics. We can look at the interim report of 24 and see what obviously is most important for GTL and others. And of course, one thing is the assessment of the black market. I'm really looking forward to what Just is providing current data, because what we see in the interim report in 24, this is really outdated. You can see figures where GTL says, well, we estimate the share of unlicensed operators was 6% against 94%. I'm saying this is an old review. I don't think that GTL will continue with these figures. But even if they approach the market with new figures, there's a huge difference between the experience of licensed operators and their assessment and what so far has been published by the regulators, which I understand because their task is, of course, to report success in combating black market operators. I don't see that there are any fundamental reforms to be expected as a result of this evaluation. Probably a few things which needs to be highlighted or can be highlighted, small things maybe. One of this is good for the virtual slot machine industry. Of course, they're going to provide simplifications for the approval proceeding of single games. At the moment, every game must be checked individually. And even if the regulator has done the same game a couple of times, it's always done just because the interstate treaty literally provides this obligation. Every game must be done separately. In the future, there will be a system. Don't know which one it will be, but it will be a system that makes it easier and faster to get permission for those games. It could be, for instance, a certification system. This could be done with test labs. I think it's rather more likely that GTL is doing this in-house with their own experts, but that's something they have on the list. Also, these small things like minimum spin duration on average are topics the regulator is discussing at the moment. We can see that, on a positive note, advertising is scrutinized, whether there is a demand for changing or even for more restricting it. As you can see now, there will be amendments, definitely, but apart from what's being discussed in other jurisdictions, only few jurisdictions outside of Germany, it's not a total advertising ban, which is discussed in Germany, which would be disastrous and makes no sense. But this is an off topic. It's nothing which we can see as part of the evaluation, even if there are similar voices, unique voices here and there, advocating in favor of this. But a massive strike will definitely be a new legal platform, new legal basis for IP blocking. IP blocking is one of the major tools to combat the black market, apart from or next to payment service blocking, which is possible, which is also in practice. There is in the interstate treaty, there's a provision which allows the operator, the regulator, to apply IP blocking, but the legal basis as it stands for now has been criticized by courts and is not applicable. So we cannot address the internet service providers to block single sites. And there has been a draft sent to the EU Commission for notification purposes, which will now replace the current legal basis and enable the regulators to address these interdiction requests, these blocking requests to the providers. And this would be a massive benefit for the license industry if with this new tool, with this sufficient tool, probably we have another weapon against the illegal industry. But I must say, of course, examples, experience in other jurisdictions for many years show it can be applied. but I have my doubts whether the illegal market and the traffic to illegal sites will be removed completely, because they changed the website within a second. They add a 1, 2, or 3, whatever, and those players who want to access these sites, even if it's blocked, they will find their ways. And if they don't know how, the internet is full of advice how to deal with this. I would say this is currently in discussion with respect to the evaluation. The final evaluation will then take place in 2006, and we expect the reports to be published in early 2027.
27, good. So data, a lot of uncertainty, some concrete steps, and we're looking forward to 2027. And thank you, Joerg. We will see more of you during the audience Q&A at the end of this webinar. Thank you very much. For next couple of questions, we will turn to Josh Hodgson, Chief Operating Officer at H2 Gambling Capital. Josh, how are you?
Very well, thanks, Willem. How are you?
All good, thank you. Thank you. Josh, a key issue that we'll be discussing today is how regulation can impact regulated gambling markets. All this backed by data, of course. My first question deals with the impact of Germany's tax model on market development. Contrary to many other regulated markets, Germany taxes player stakes rather than operator GGR. With the benefit of hindsight, of course, how has this impacted the market, you think? And what measures are operators taking to mitigate this situation? Josh, over to you.
Yeah, it's very clear to us that the tax on stakes in Germany has impacted the market significantly. By being taxed on stakes, operators are paying taxes on all bets, even when they're losing money, rather than just being taxed on their actual revenue, like in a GGR-based tax system. To really see how this has affected the market, we can look at online slots games as an example. So for online slots, the usual return to player percentage is around 95%, meaning that an operator has around a 5% GGR margin. The result of this for a licensed operator in Germany would be that they would remit 100% of their revenue in tax. That's before any other costs are paid. And I'm sure we'd all agree that that's not a really commercially viable business model at all.
Yeah.
The only way that an operator can get around this is to lower the return to player percentage, thereby increasing the GGR margin. But this means that they make the game significantly less attractive to players. So the average return to player offered by German onshore operators in 2024 was 88.5%. That's a significant gap to other markets where GGR is taxed instead of stakes. So unlicensed operators targeting the German market, on the other hand, could offer a RTP percentage of 98.5%, and they'd still generate revenue because they don't have the burden of that tax. So if we consider this from the player's perspective, the choice of which operator that you would go with, one that is paying you 88.5% on average, one that is paying you 98.5% on average, is an incredibly simple choice. So offshore operators are simply providing German players with a much better chance of winning, and more German players are ignoring the onshore market in favor of better odds and better games. So to really isolate the impact of the tax on stakes compared to GGR, we can look at the difference between the onshore market in Ontario, which regulated shortly after the German market did, and then look at how the trend has changed from that pre-regulation sort of revenue generation, where Ontario opted to tax GGR at 20% rather than stakes at 5% in Germany. This allowed operators to set GGR margins at what they believe will be the most viable to attract players to their onshore offering. And as a result, there's a meaningful difference in the RTP offered. So there's a number of other dynamics that make the market less attractive in Germany than Ontario, things like deposit limits, time between spins, no table games. But the significantly lower return to player percentage materially changes the user experience. So if we look at the chart that's being shown on the screen here, that allows us to compare the size of the Ontario market in the quarter before regulation to that 2 years later. And you can see clearly the market has grown threefold. When we look at the exact same time frame for Germany, so this has been indexed to 100, so we're comparing apples with apples, as it were. The revenue generated by operators who chose to remain in the market and get licensed has dropped to a third of what it was over the same time frame. So where licensed operators are taxed on stakes, they're forced to materially change their pricing structure, and it completely alters the dynamics for the player.
Yeah.
So this relationship only serves to drive players away from the licensed onshore market to offshore operators who pay no tax and abide to none of the required regulations.
Interesting. So that could have been Germany there. It's quite clear with the RTP comparison, Josh. Thank you. That was quite interesting. In the meantime, you see the QR code on the left bottom of your screen. If you have questions to Josh, please ask him there or upvote somebody else's question, and we hopefully can deal with those at the end of the webinar. Second question, Josh, deals more specifically with Germany's large and growing offshore online gambling market. Assuming that Germans are not playing less than 5 years ago, which I think is reasonable, data shows that the black market has grown considerably. How big is Germany's black iGaming market currently, as Joerg also asked himself before? And how does Germany's black market growth compare to other European countries? Josh?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as we can see from the chart, the darker line there displays the offshore GGR generated in Germany, and the lighter blue line, the onshore GGR. So we estimate that the total German offshore gambling market will generate over 1.5 billion euros of GGR in 2025. We expect this is going to continue to grow substantially out to 2030. Whereas when we look at the onshore market, it's about half the size of this currently at 0.85 billion. And whereas the offshore market is projected to grow going forward, the onshore market is remaining flat at best. So what this chart doesn't show is the change between what is the trends in betting and gaming separately, because there is a marked difference in channelization between these two products. This is something that I'll go through in more detail at the conference. But if we just look at iGaming specifically, the offshore market is around 3 times bigger than the onshore market, and it generates 1.2 billion euros alone. That represents a channelization rate of only 35%, and we expect that to continue to drop significantly going forward as well. So whilst all European markets are experiencing pressure from a rising black market, there are very few that see this low rate of channelization like we see in Germany. The rapid growth in crypto casinos across the whole industry in the past 3 to 4 years has meant that licensed operators in all markets have had to work harder and harder within the regulations of each market to just compete for traffic with these operators. Our data suggests that internet traffic in European markets going to unlicensed crypto casinos has increased 8-fold between 2021 and today. That is an astronomical increase in the amount of traffic that's going to those sites. So whilst all markets are struggling, the regulatory situation in Germany makes it virtually impossible for any operator licensed in the market to offer a product that competes with anything that the offshore operators can offer. So licensed operators across Europe are in the midst of a really serious battle against the offshore market. But in Germany, it's as if the operators are having to try and fight that battle with both hands tied behind their back based on the current regulatory situation.
1 in 3 is a powerful number indeed. And thank you, Josh. You've given us some serious food for thought. Before we move on to audience Q&A, I apologize. Here we are. So, sorry, Josh, I was almost skipping your third question. The third question I wanted to ask you here, based on your insights in how regulated markets grow and develop, what kind of restrictions push players to illegal alternatives? In your opinion, how can regulators maintain market viability while still effectively protecting players?
Yeah, so when we think about market viability, if we really distill this down, I'd say that there are three main considerations that regulators have to seriously consider when aiming to ensure that the onshore market is in a viable situation. And they are attractiveness, awareness, and accessibility. So if we start with the attractiveness, what I mean by this is, do the regulations in the market allow licensed operators to offer products that are equally as attractive as to what an offshore operator can to ensure that they stay onshore? So whilst there's lots of factors that could fall into this category, perhaps the two most significant that we'll look at today are the tax rates and tax base and product restrictions. So we've already discussed the issues with ineffective tax regimes, but the chart shown here really highlights how a conducive tax rate of between 15 and 25% of GGR maximizes the rate of channelization in a market, whilst also balancing significant tax generation potential for the government themselves. When you change this to something like stakes, it completely changes the dynamics of the market, and channelization will inevitably suffer. When we look at product restrictions, when licensed operators have to severely restrict the type of games that they can offer, the payout rates or the odds and the stakes that can be placed, they simply lose the ability to attract players to their offering to unlicensed operators who can simply offer players exactly what they want. And those players will not stay with an onshore operator out of just loyalty. They will go offshore where they can play those games. So moving on to awareness, this refers to a licensed operator's ability to communicate to players that they are in fact licensed in that market and abiding by the regulations that are required. So when the advertising of licensed operators is overly restricted or even banned, it becomes almost impossible for players to know if they're playing on the site of a responsible licensed operator or a completely unlicensed one. This works in the reverse too. So by effectively banning and blocking advertising from unlicensed operators, it helps clear those muddy waters of who you should and should not be betting with. So players can much better understand when they are on a site that is playing by those rules, and doing their due diligence in terms of actually protecting players. So yeah, we understand it's an incredibly tricky thing to ban advertising of unlicensed operators in the age of influencer advertising and Telegram broadcasting, but it just further highlights it's an absolute must that it should be seriously considered by regulators to look at how they can stop the channels of offshore operators from really advertising their presence in a market. And finally, if we look at accessibility, what I mean by this is how easy is it for players to access, fund, and withdraw money from licensed operators versus unlicensed operators. So there are two sides to every coin, and it's not enough to only place restrictions on onshore operators and do nothing to combat unlicensed operators. So by making it easier for players to access the sites of licensed operators and facilitate fast, secure, and reliable transactions, you remove barriers and friction. By making it harder for those players then to access unlicensed sites and making it trickier to fund accounts with unlicensed operators, those barriers and friction points become significant pain points to customers themselves, and it just reduces the attraction of using an offshore operator. I realize there's many other factors and considerations that are essential to a well-regulated and viable onshore market. But however, the goal of all regulators is surely to protect players whilst allowing them to gamble in the way that they want. So anything that tips the scales in favor of unlicensed offshore operators is at complete odds with that goal.
Very clear the factors that contribute to that, Josh. Thank you very much. And we'll be back with you in a second, going to the audience Q&A. Before we move to the audience Q&A, you can still point your camera to the QR code at the bottom of the screen, submit the question or upvote somebody else's question. And I think we are running quite well in time here. I believe we had 153 participants today, or at least registrations. And some of those have asked questions to all of us. Let's go with the first question. So the first question from Slido from the audience is, do we need the agreement of 16th state legislatures to see any change in the Glücksspielstaatsvertrag? I think that's Joerg, one that has your name written all over it.
Yeah. We have 16 federal states, 16 prime ministers, and as far as I know, we need 13 signatures of prime ministers to change everything, to change anything with the interstate treaty. Do you remember some years ago, there was a draft of a new interstate treaty which could not set into force because they couldn't find this quorum.
Yeah, quite clear, Joerg. So it's 13th here. Next question from Slido, please, the second one. Josh, the GGL seems to believe that market generalization is much higher. Do you have any idea what their estimates are based on?
So we have limited information at the minute, only what they have released in their reports, which said they looked at the number of sites that were targeting the market. It really, when you look at the report from 2024, it's a short sort of extract that goes through what they're sort of doing to assess this. And just looking at the number of sites and the number of operators actually accessing the market isn't a reliable way of assessing the size of revenue at all. You have to consider a number of factors. The way we look at the market includes monthly tracking of the internet traffic. So looking at from German IP addresses, how much of that traffic is going to operators that are licensed in the market, how much is going to operators that are unlicensed in the market, how much time are people spending on those sites, how the spend differs between the licensed and unlicensed sites, something that we get from doing independent surveys in each market. And then we also look at affiliate traffic, so where people are landing on affiliate sites, where are those affiliates pushing players. So from our side, we cannot marry up the GGL's numbers with offshore revenue in the slightest to what we would expect in any other market based on the amount of traffic that we're seeing going to offshore operators. It would imply a complete outlier in the spend. So if we look at the number of players that are going to those offshore operators, they would have to be spending pennies to make those numbers make sense. And in our view, that's not the reality of the German market as it is today.
Quite clear. Anything to add, Joerg?
No, I think this is an impressive evaluation, and it shows that there are big differences. And probably what I'm interested in, just probably you can give us an idea where your figures are based from, how your research works, because that shows how well-founded these figures are.
Sure, yeah. So we, based on the sort of factors that I mentioned just then, we use that same process in every single market. We track 150 markets worldwide, and we've done that for 20 years now of being in the industry, and that gives us a really good insight into how things have evolved over time and how we've seen the rise in crypto casinos. So we see by brand where that traffic's going and how those trends shift over time. It's not just like we're taking a one-off sort of top-down look into each market. It's something that's done from the ground up across every single jurisdiction that we track. And of course, we base all the data for the onshore side from the regulators' reports themselves. In most markets, unfortunately, in Germany, it's something that we're still not able to do because the figures released by the GGL, even for the onshore market, don't seem to match up to what we see from the tax revenue reported by the Ministry of Finance. So even when we're then looking at what we'd expect the spend per customer to be from the onshore site, which is an important consideration when looking at what you'd expect for offshore sites, in Germany, we don't actually have a exact figure that we would use, for example, in another market like the Dutch market or the Danish market, for example, where that the data that's reported by the regulator is something that we can really rely on. So we'll use every data point available to us, and in Germany, that is the tax data that we can reverse engineer quite easily, just applying the tax rate to get an understanding of what the onshore turnover and GGR would be within the market. So yeah, I guess it's the way we look at the market is the same across every single market. It's not as if we're singling out Germany here and saying that the channelization is really bad because of some random factors altogether. It's just an assessment in the same uniform way we would do of any other market. It's just that the regulations within the German market have such a disproportionate impact on the size of the offshore market.
Thank you, Josh, explaining this about your methodology and how this differs from the other one. Let's go to the last question of the webinar of today. Short but sweet, to what extent does the industry have the ear of the GGL or state legislatures? Could you say something to that, Joerg?
Well, I would say the ear itself is not enough. You can use your ears, but you also have to listen, and it's a matter of dialogue. I would say there's room for improvement, but there is a dialogue, and I think we are supported by the fact that we have trade associations who could speak generally with one voice to the regulators and not just the industry, every operator by himself. If you look at other jurisdictions, there is a dialogue that is more lively. You find the regulators being accessible. GGL regulators started to become more and more accessible, which is really important to mention. And I hope that many of GGL regulators will join you in Berlin for our event. That is something which is so important, that you can speak face to face and probably between the lines, but it's important. If we're all sitting in our offices, sometimes making phone calls, it's not enough. So I love this picture, the ear of GGL. There is an ear, but every head has two ears, and we should take them both and make use of it more and more than it happens at the moment.
Exactly. So an ear, dialogue, and well, all GGL team members are, of course, welcome in Berlin. Repeating that again. And thank you, Joerg and Josh, for joining us today and answering these questions from the audience with excellence. On behalf of the audience, I thank you for that. Your observation and comments were much appreciated. And of course, we will see you live in Berlin in 5 weeks from now. So thank you very much again for joining us today. Next, please.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Like I already mentioned, this year's conference will focus on two topics in particular. First, the evaluation of the 21 state gambling treaty, and more specifically, what the industry can expect from this process. Second, how all stakeholders in Germany's regulated iGaming market can work together, as Joerg just mentioned, to turn around the ongoing growth of the black market. Next, please. Then, who will join us in Berlin to discuss these highly impactful issues? I think you'll, of course, see more of Joerg and Josh, who will share more in-depth information on the various areas of expertise as they just shared it with you in the last half hour. Then, who else is coming? Naturally, the GGL will be represented, but besides them, we also hear from all major German and European trade bodies, as well as leading operators and affiliates. This means that the 2025 Gaming in Germany conference is the place to be to meet the key decision makers in the German gambling market. The registration is open. I hope to see you all in Berlin in just 5 weeks in the Hilton DoubleTree Hotel near the Kurfürstendamm. With this, we've come to the end of this Gaming in Germany webinar. I hope you found it useful. A link to a full recording of today's webinar will be shared in a post-webinar email that we'll be sending out as soon as possible. And as always, let's keep in touch. If you have not signed up for newsletters and magazines, please do so at www.gamingin.eu. and let's stay in touch. Thank you very much.